If you would, try to make it to your seats. We do have name tags, so look for your name. Just like herding cats. Good afternoon. On behalf of the State Board of Education, I would like to welcome you to Boise State University and this progress report on the implementation of the task force recommendations. In 2013, we came together to work with the public and education stakeholders to develop a series of recommendations that we believed would improve Idaho public education. It has just been over 2 years since the recommendations were submitted to Governor Otter. And today, you will receive a report from the task force chairman, Richard Westerberg, on the significant work that has been done to make the recommendations a reality. The Board of Education is honored to have been asked by the governor to shepherd the task force process, and we are pleased to be co-hosting this meeting with him. Governor Otter, a man who really needs no introduction, was reelected for a third consecutive term as governor in 2014. He's previously served 3 terms in Congress, 4 terms as Idaho's lieutenant governor, and also a former member of the Idaho House of Representatives. The governor has been a strong supporter of improving education in Idaho and preparing students for college and careers. He supports the State Board of Education's goal that 60% of Idahoans aged 25 to 34 have a post-secondary degree or certificate by 2020. He has been an advocate in our state and abroad for growing Idaho's economy, and he knows that Idaho must provide high-quality education opportunities from kindergarten to career in order to meet the talent needs of business and industry. Please join me in welcoming Governor Otter.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chairman, and welcome everybody. Once again, thank you for your attendance here on obviously most important issues. It's not only important to the state. Can you all hear me? Do I have to? Is there a button? Not only important to the state, but most important to the citizens of the state and the future. If I could take us back just a few years, and that few years would have been, let's say, 2005. In 2005, when I was still in Congress, I had decided to leave Congress and run for governor. And once that word got out, I started hearing, as you might expect, from different folks. And some of the folks that I heard from, most of the folks I heard from, I should say, questioned our direction in education in Idaho, primarily in the K through 12, but also were we doing enough in higher education. And those questions came, and those inquiries came from 2 main sources. The first source was the business community. And the business community said, you know, we really can't hire the product that you're turning out of the high schools. Not without having them go through some remedial processes, either in English, you know, they can't write a business letter, or in math, it's difficult for them to make change. It's difficult for them to balance a checkbook. It's difficult for us to process them into our business without some remedial education. Education, by the way, that they should have received in K through 12. The second group of folks that I heard from, not only individually but also collectively, were the university presidents, the higher education folks. And their complaint to me was that we were filling up the remedial classrooms for the first semester, for the second semester, and sometimes well into the sophomore year. The remedial classrooms were being filled up to teach them things, to bring them up to speed for college work. There were a lot of other folks individually that came forward and said, we've got to absolutely do something about education in Idaho. And so the business community actually stepped up to the plate, put an organization together, what at that time was called the IBEE. IBEECDFG, I don't remember it all, but it was an important process, and I met with them several times. And at one time, I met with them, then Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tom Luna. And we challenged him. We said, okay, tell us what we've got to do. You're the smart guys. You know how to purchase the raw material for your plants and for your businesses. You know what you need in your workforce development, so you tell us not only what you need, but how do we get there? Because you've got a tendency that when there is something missing in the marketplace that you need, you go out and create a vendor for that. And the vendor for the workforce today, the vendors, are our education system. And so it wasn't too long after that, as you'll recall, that we came forward with after some period of time, because we had started in 2008 into the recession. And so that started immediately limited resources. And those limited resources were limited to everybody. Although we had $400 million at that time in savings, we chose not to spend it all in 1 year because it appeared to us that that recession was going to last more than 365 days. And so along with the legislative appropriators, we sat down and said, it would be smart for us to maybe spend that over a 3-year period. And so that's precisely the course that we were set on, and by 2010 we had spent it all. But that didn't negate the responsibility that we had under the Constitution to provide for a system of free, uniform, and thorough common public schools. And so we resisted those first few years, 2008, starting into 2009. We resisted any kind of a reduction off of the previous appropriation for education. But when you get hammered with roughly $1 billion less in income, remember, my first budget was $3.2 billion in 2007. And by 2010, our budget was $2.2 billion. Now, we had that $400 million in savings, but we had been metering that out at about $50–60 million a year. And so you can't take that kind of a hit on your income without taking a look at the big three in Idaho. And the big three in Idaho, number one is education. If you take K through 12, you're around 48–49% of the budget. If you add to that higher education, now you're up a little over 66% of the budget. You add to that corrections and health and welfare, and you're at 94% of the budget. So all the cutbacks that were made in other areas of government, we finally got to the point to where by starting in 2010, where we had to start make some corrections in education itself. That was the last resort, and I think correctly so. So anyway, about that time is when we started initiating what eventually became Props 1, 2, and 3. And Props 2 and 3 met the ballot, but didn't meet the measure of success that they needed to. I felt all along that those props were a good product. But Luna and I had developed a lousy process, or not developed a good process, for education and for instructions on what those props would do and were intended to do. We failed at the ballot box. Immediately after that is when this task force was created. And because we knew we had some good ideas, we knew we needed reform. We knew that we needed a new vision. And not only just a new vision, but a new long-term vision for education in Idaho, at all levels, but primarily at the workforce development level. And so with the task force and with its work, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. In fact, we crossed party lines. We crossed conservative liberal lines on the support of the 20 recommendations that came out of the task force. I can never remember at any time, and having served on the Education Committee from 1972 to 1976, when I was a freshman, sophomore legislator from Canyon County, I don't remember that kind of unification of the various and usually differential parties in the political body. And so out of that task force recommendations and the 20 recommendations, and you are to be congratulated on those, because that was the first time I ever saw a 5-year plan for education. We got a 5-year plan for fish and game. We got a 5-year plan for highways. We got a 5-year plan for almost everything. We know 5 years from now what kind of workforce development we're going to need in our Department of Labor and in our Commerce, in our economic development for the state. I don't know that there's an agency or a department in the state government, save education, that didn't have a 5-year plan. And so you pulled off, I think, something that is miraculous. And you've also brought a lot of otherwise folks that wouldn't normally agree together. And so we got year one under our belt. Year one's in the budget. The money's appropriated. The satisfactory effort of the Department of the Appropriations Department and the Education Committees, I might add, Reed, of both the House and the Senate. We've got a unified effort. And so with that unified effort, we ended up with a 7.4% budget for education in an effort to not only make up for past austerity that we had to ensue during the economic downturn, but also in an effort to redirect some of that money and catch up with the development of our workforce, catch up with our idea of making sure that we've got at least 60% of the citizens of the state of Idaho between 25 and 34 that are have a secondary degree of some kind or a professional technical degree, certificate of some kind. We've heard from the Department of Labor, and I would also tell you this: you're not alone. Every agency of state, I don't know if it's the Department of Labor or Building Safety, you name the department, I would tell you they're in total support of your creation here, because they also need employees in 2020. We need new biologists, we need new chemists, we need new engineers of all manner, of all of the 7 disciplines. And we need those almost in every agency. And so I would tell you that the 20 agencies of state are your partners in this. And if you find yourself deficient or anemic in some area where you need some help, or you need some facts or figures, like the Department of Labor, who's the first one to tell us that we're 95,000 employees short by the year 2020 of where we need to be, and the professions and the degrees that they need to have. We've got those kind of figures. If we haven't got them, we are getting those kind of figures from every one of my directors. Because generally, I think in many ways, the needs of the free market community in our state are reflected by the demands that are put on every agency. The Department of Building Safety can't issue a building permit or won't issue a building permit to somebody that doesn't need it. And so when the deluge comes in and says, we need this and we need that, that means the free market is demanding of us that we have the kind of expertise in our own agency. And so that's another way in which we measure our depleted supply of professional people within government, but also for what the private sector is going to need. And so improving the outcomes of our students is what we're all here for, but it's not just up to us. It's also got to be up to the parents. It's got to be up to the students and the teacher in the classroom and the superintendents and the boards, the school boards association. All of those folks have got an enormous part to play in this partnership for the future. So I think using the 20 recommendations as we go forward, and I was just telling the chairman, Richard Westerberg, that you know, from time to time, even the best laid out roadmap, we need to take a good look at and make sure we're headed in the right direction. And not only that, did we see the things that we intended to see along the way? So we may need to measure the performance this year. We'll need to measure that 7.4% budget against what our expectations were. And there may need to be some corrections. So this is going to be an ongoing and a maturing process for at least the next 5 years. And not only that, I fully expect in the next couple of years to push it out 2 more years so that we always have a horizon ahead of us that's 5 years out, and we're reflecting from that horizon that says, this is what you're going to need in another 5 years. Today, we know that the computer numerical codes people were terribly short of. I gave an award this morning, a conservation award for energy this morning, to a company that has saved enough electricity through the construction of a new plant to replace 3 old plants, but with only about 10% of the people, a little less than 10% of the people, because they're doing it all with computers. They're doing it all with some new technology that's coming on. And they fully expect, by the way, that was enough, as I recall, to light, they saved enough electricity in 1 year to light 5,000 homes. 5,000 homes. And I would tell you, that's the cheapest electricity that we can make, because the most lucrative electricity savings, or the most lucrative electricity production, is in conservation. Because if you don't consume it, you don't need to make it. We're fortunate because 60% of our power in the state of Idaho is from falling water. It's green and it's perpetual, so long as God continues to give us the snowfall and the rain. So if it starts to dry up a little bit, start praying. But with all that, with all the new technology, with all the new plants, with all the new efforts that are the next generation of miracles for our products in Idaho, whether it's dug out of the ground, grown in the ground, or cut off the land. In all of those cases, we ought to have smart people around. And so that's what we're all about, and that's why we're here. Once again, before I close and turn it over to Richard, I just want to say I can't thank you enough, because I would tell you this, you exceeded my expectations. Not only in your product that you produced, but you exceeded my expectation in the acceptance of that product by the great diversity that we enjoy here in Idaho, one of our greatest strengths in our population. Because you've got everybody looking in the future, and you got them looking 5 years down the road. Thank you.
Governor Otter, I want to thank you for an important precedent that you have set this morning by giving your presentation while seated. because now I can do that.
Oh,
And I actually got up at that podium and I discovered either it was too short or my eyes were not so good. So I apologize. I'm going to actually run you through these slides while seated. You know, when I first got involved in the effort with the task force, two things struck me. And the first was that when the governor called us, he didn't give us a lot of specific instruction. In fact, he gave us really no limits on the things we can consider, either by topic or financially. He gave us a tremendous amount of freedom. If you think about that, I think that's a pretty courageous act for a governor to take that risk, because who knows where we would have gone. The second thing that struck me was the diversity of opinion of the task force members. There were 31 task force members, all very bright people, but all people that came with their own set of expectations and were pretty fixed on what they thought about education. And I would admit to you today that I'm not sure I thought we could get anything to the finish line with a consensus. And yet, here we are today with 19 recommendations that had absolute consensus, and going forward with 20 recommendations that I think have been well received and I think are well thought out. Now, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to try to lead you through those recommendations one at a time, with an idea to try to give you a progress report on where we are with each one of those. Now, we'll take questions at the end of the presentation. If you have questions or comments about any of the recommendations or what the implementation strategy has been or what you would like to see. But we'll do that at the end of the briefing. So Tracy's going to flip through the slides. Could we have number 2? Could we have number 3? Could we have number 4? Oh, not that quickly. I'm sorry. Mastery-based system, once fully implemented, would shift to a K through education system where students advance based upon the content mastery rather than seat time requirements. House Bill 110 focused on these areas: implementing a statewide awareness campaign to promote understanding and interest, establishment of a committee of educators to identify roadblocks and possible solutions, development of an incubator program with the initial cohort of 20 local education agency participants. $400,000 was appropriated in FY16 to the Department for a Public Awareness Campaign. The department has formed a committee of educators and superintendent that are currently working on a report that will come back to the legislature, the governor, and the board on the by the 31st of January. Core standards. We strongly endorse the Idaho core standards. We expect to see our students perform academically at a higher level as the standards are implemented in the schools across the state, especially for our younger students who will have had standards in place at the early grade levels and can build upon the educational foundation. Literacy proficiency. We recommend that students demonstrate mastery of literacy before moving on to significant content learning, because they must learn to read before they can learn content in other subject areas. The 2016 legislative session, the board submitted legislation proposing substantial intervention for students who will score below the basic on IRI, including a full day's kindergarten. Additional 20 hours of intervention for students in grade 1 through 3 who score basic on the IRI, and intervention for students who score basic or below basic on the IRR alternative. Advanced opportunities. We recommend that the state ensure that all students have access to advanced opportunities by expanding post-secondary offerings while students is still in high school. Senate Bill 1050 was approved by the 2015 legislature, consolidating the various state-funded advanced opportunity programs to simplify administration of the programs. Senate Bill 313 was approved by the 2015 legislature, distributing additional funds to school district for college and career advising and clarifying additional models districts could use to establish college and career advising programs. If the formula is fully funded in FY17, districts would receive a minimum of $10,000 to use towards college and career advising. Revamp the state's accountability structure. We recommended that the state revamp the accountability structure involving schools. The existing structure that relies on compliance mandates should be replaced with a system that is based on accountability for students' outcomes. Schools scored on 2 metrics, reading and improvement. Readiness would be based on the percentage of graduating students that are prepared to continue to the next level. Improvement would be based on the year-over-year improvement in a level of readiness. Statewide measures would be based on 3 academic bands: K through 6, K through 8, and high school. Proposed legislation for 2016 will incorporate these metrics into a district continuous improvement plan, and I'll talk more about that later on. Empower autonomy by removing constraints. We recommended that the Governor's Office, the State Board of Education, and the State Department of Education evaluate existing education laws and administrative rules, work with the legislature to remove those which impede local autonomy, flexibility to adapt to local circumstances, and the ability of schools to be agile, adaptive, innovative, and drive continuous improvement. During the 2015 legislative session, the legislature approved legislation repeal sections of the code that were identified in initial review as part of the subcommittee's work and no longer necessary. Full implementation of this recommendation will require additional annual reviews by the board and board staff. Annual strategic planning, assessment, and continuous focus on improvement. We recommended each district be required to have a strategic plan and to renew it annually that identifies and focuses district-wide continuous improvement towards statewide goals. Both the local board and the state should provide oversight to ensure the plan is appropriate to local circumstances and aligned to support the state goals. The plan forms the basis from which accountability will be structured and the superintendent will be evaluated. During the 2015 legislative session, we clarified the intent of strategic planning requirements and provided training reimbursements. The board's 2016 legislative agenda includes a proposal for statewide measures based on the 3 grade bands that I talked about earlier. Statewide electronic collaboration system. We recommended that a statewide electronic collaboration system be adopted for educators to share ideas and resources across the state. The 2016 appropriation included $611,000 in addition to the $2 million base to be used towards instructional learning and management systems determined at the district level. High-speed bandwidth and wireless infrastructure. We recommended the state expand the existing high-speed bandwidth infrastructure to ensure every school has the bandwidth and wireless infrastructure necessary for simultaneous equal access opportunity. This will require ongoing funding for repair and replenishment of the equipment. This is a work in progress. The Legislative Interim Committee is evaluating solutions and will make recommendations to the legislature and the governor to be considered by the 2000 legislature for action in the 2017 budget. Educator and student devices, student technology devices. We recommended that each educator and student have adequate access to technological devices with appropriate content to support equal access and opportunity. Educator professional development is critical to effective implementation of technology. The state technology pilot program was discontinued and funding appropriated from 2016 for the district to use on technology. Restoration of operational funding. We recommended restoration of operational funding to the 2009 level. In 2 years, the districts have received 2/3 of that recommended funding. As you'll recall, the original task force allowed 5 years for that restoration, so we're well ahead of schedule. Career ladder compensation. We recommended a phased implementation of a career ladder for teacher compensation. The model proposed combines competitive salaries with incentives and rewards and accountability. Further, we believe it should be tied to a revised system of state licensure. House Bill 296 was approved by the 2015 legislature, establishing a career ladder for instructional staff. School district salary-based appropriations will be incrementally increased each year based on the career ladder until fully implemented in 5 years. House Bill 296 again combined the recommendations from the subcommittee into a two-rung career ladder and a master teacher premium with an addition of a professional teacher endorsement as part of the certification requirements, similar to the residency requirements recommendation. In 2016, we are submitting legislation that incorporates pupil service staff on the career ladder, and you'll remember that was one of the omissions. Enrollment model funding. We recommended a change from the average daily attendance to average daily enrollment/membership. This will enhance fiscal stability and remove current barriers to personalized and/or mastery learning models that are required to meet the state board's 60% goal. The Public School Funding Subcommittee is still working on this recommendation. It has brought forth an interim solution to be approved as a single ADA count for all school funding to use ADA as part of the calculation. In this interim solution, the support unit calculations will be based either on the midterm ADA count or on the average of the midterm and the later term count. Tiered licensure. We recommended a continuum of professional growth and learning that is tied to licensure. Movement through the system would be accomplished in very specific, objective ways using performance measures. Elements of tiered licensure were ultimately folded into the career ladder through a 3-year residency period and a professional endorsement. Provisions along with the performance measures achieved through evaluation process and student achievement or growth. These next 3 recommendations we've combined in one slide. They're mentoring, ongoing job embedded professional learning, and site-based collaboration among teachers and instructional leaders. The implementation of these 3 recommendations has been done collectively. We recommend that each district develop a mentoring plan for support of new teachers. The state provided funding support for a mentoring program, and the districts provide regular professional learning opportunities. We supported ongoing funding for professional development and encouraged districts to restructure the traditional school day schedule to allow for job-embedded collaboration time. Current funding is available through the leadership premiums, professional development, and discretionary funding. The board supports continuing funding for leadership premiums and the professional development, along with additional funding in FY17 for 3 additional contractual days specifically for professional development. Training development of school administrators, superintendents, and boards. We recommended the continued training and professional development of school administrators, superintendents, and school boards. The committee supported the full development of implementation of the Idaho standards for effective principals and pilot work being conducted in 2013 school year to further explore effective performance measures for school administrators. This further ongoing implementation and support of administrator training in assessing classroom performance through observation. Funds are currently appropriated to cover the cost of providing teach scope, training proficiency, exams for administrators. Administrative rule requires administrators to be able to show proficiency on conducting evaluations by 2018. House Bill 296, amended Idaho Code requiring administrators to earn 3 credits in conducting teacher evaluations as part of their recertification requirements. Section 33320 of the Idaho Code reimbursed school boards up to $6,000 annually, subject to appropriation for the training in continuous improvement process, finance, planning, administration, evaluation, ethics, and government. Provided enhanced pre-service teaching opportunities through State College of Education. We supported the effort of Idaho's higher education institutions to increase and enhance the clinical field experience for pre-service teachers. Idaho's approved teacher preparation programs continue to work together through a coalition made up of the College of Education at Idaho's public and private institutions to increase and enhance clinical field experiences, and have come to agreement on a minimum standard for granting institutional recommendations based on that experience. And lastly, participation in the CCSSO's Our Responsibility, Our Promise recommendation to improve teacher preparation. We supported Idaho's participation in implementing the Council of Chief State School Officers, Our Responsibility, Our Promise recommendations to help ensure that each teacher and principal is able to prepare students for college and for the workforce. The board's FY17 budget requests includes a request for 1 additional FTE. In funding this position, it will focus on teacher preparation programs, effectiveness standards, additional issues around teacher effectiveness. This work impacts both recommendations 19 and 20. I'm done. Before we go to questions, I guess I would like to recognize the effective work of the Idaho State Legislature in implementing these recommendations. They've moved quickly to look at them when they were ready, and they acted very quickly to get them to the finish line, and we greatly appreciate their efforts. I also like to recognize the role the department has and will play in the implementation of these recommendations. There's still a lot of work to be done here, and the department will play a pivotal role in that. Now, with that, I know I've ran through this pretty quickly, but I know you all followed it through the process, just like I did, and watched the recommendations as they were acted upon. You have a detailed handout so that you have the detail of what was done in terms of implementation. But anyway, we would open it now for questions, which Tracy will answer. Hearing no questions, Governor, are there any questions or comments? I don't know what you thought about the implementation process. I guess I was a little bit surprised when the recommendations came out at how much kind of broad acceptance there were of the recommendations, not just from the legislature, but from education stakeholders across the state, folks kind of getting behind the work that all of you did. Questions?
I have a comment, and there was a lot of work done and a lot of discussion about sending the money to local districts and letting them spend it as they see the need. Yet we have a problem with that. One of the recommendations dealt with mentoring. We've had a statute on the books for a long time that requires every district to provide mentoring for new teachers. And we funded it for a couple of years, and when the funding went away, we lost all accountability for mentoring programs on a local basis. If there's something that the legislature feels important and wants to put it in statute, they have to assign a dollar value to that to districts. They can't just say it's included in your discretionary funding.
Thank you.
Not a question, just a comment. First of all, thank you, Governor Otter. Appreciate your leadership in forming the task force, and state board and Chairman Westerberg, appreciate all of you and all your time and so on and so forth. That I was the only one on the task force that voted no on Common Core, and I'd like to make a comment about that as well. And I think I represent a number of people in the state that feel very concerned about it. And I've just got a few thoughts, if you'll indulge me. And the same concerns I had then, I have now. And number one, Common Core was not democratically implemented as we like to know it. It was developed largely by non-educators. And I think the dearth of the K-12 educator input is reflected in some of those standards as well. Common Core presents a hyper-focus on two core subjects at the expense of the traditional, well-rounded American educational experience. I'm concerned that the intention behind Common Core since its inception was to wed common standards to a high-stakes assessment. Test-centric education allows for incredible scapegoating and profiteering while it bankrupts a child's educational experience. It's such a waste of time and energy and money, and in some cases it's truly tragic. Forced implementation of Common Core benefits corporations like Pearson, which is a huge player in the educational world, and which is ironically a British company, which has now embedded itself into American education by pushing these standards, which then pushes the product line of Common Core: ready materials, teacher aids, classroom guides, pre-assessment products, assessments, post-assessment analysis. It's concerning to me. And Common Core fails miserably in the younger grades by not understanding their cognitive development. I was in a kindergarten class and the poor teacher was trying to teach parts of speech and adverbs, and I was, are you kidding? What are we doing? I was really concerned. The federal government wants to drive public education, and Common Core comes terribly close to having direct federal intervention into what has traditionally and constitutionally been a local and state endeavor, i.e. the education of our children. Public education doesn't belong to powerful corporations, profit-minded charlatans, and it belongs to we, the American people, parents, teachers, educators, administrators, local boards. It's a local endeavor. I'm concerned because Common Core was derived from what I consider to be a very short-sighted, mean-spirited, and punitive No Child Left Behind. I don't think it's too late to reverse course on this. I know I was outvoted tremendously, and I understand that, but I feel like someone needs to speak up and speak out against Common Core and the high-stakes nature of the test. I think we just need to be careful before we wholly embrace. I know I'll have fellow educators that disagree with me, but I on the task force, there was a drive for additional training for administrators and school boards and so on and so forth. We have to be careful about what we require for school boards. They are democratically elected, and often they're not getting paid, so we have to be really careful about the requirements. As far as the administrators, they're trained extensively in teacher evaluations, coming through the preparation programs to become an administrator. But I'm in favor of additional training. But honestly, the Teachscape videos could be used for the prisoners at Guantanamo to extract information. That was attempted humor. They're really pretty bad. And having to watch 40 hours of Teachscape videos while it's a sole proprietor, it's just excessive, and I think we just need to take a second look at that statewide. So with that, Mr. Chair, I'm done. Thanks.
Thank you. Are there other comments or questions?
I'd like to respond to some of Jeffrey's comment. First off, any residual belief that this was a federal program should be dispelled. My first meeting as governor after the National Governors Association in February of 2007 included myself, Mitch Daniels, and I think 5 other governors at the time. And you know what we discussed is our workforce. We discussed our education systems within our states and how we needed to change those. And so any lingering idea out there that this was a federally sponsored, or the genesis of this came out of the Federal Department of Education, is wrong. Is simply wrong. It was the governors themselves that got together and said, we need to do something. Now, the only crossroad that ever passed through the development of our education and our Common Core within our states. The only one was when the Secretary of Education allowed some of those states that didn't have the money in order to develop their program, allowed them to use some race to the top. That's the only one. There was no dictum, there was no memorandum that you will use this money and this is what you'll do with it, other than improving your education, but no direction on how to improve that education. This was the creation of the states themselves, as it should have been, and if Jimmy Carter would have left us be running our own education systems to the extent that I believe that we all should. But he didn't. But I just want to dispel any lingering belief that this was a federally sponsored or federally created. Now, have they tried to take it over? I think there's been some efforts, but they've been resisted on every front. Those governors that have retracted themselves from their Common Core, earlier on Common Core support, unfortunately one of them happens to be in Indiana, which Mitch Daniels was the governor of Indiana at the time. And there's been a few others, but most of those, as far as I'm concerned, are responding to what those folks within their states want. And so I believe that a lot of the disinformation that came out early on was sourced in the wrong place. It had nothing to do with the federal government.
Karen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to go back to and still assuring that the legislature gets what they want. And even with Chairman DeMorna, we've had this discussion in his committee. It's a hard step for everyone to take, that autonomy, giving that autonomy to the local school districts while still ensuring that we have what we want from the legislature. But just want to offer our services anytime there's legislation written, and we've been working with Tracy and Maryland and really taking a look at that legislation and what that means for that local control piece. So we're appreciative of those efforts. We know it's a fine line. We know that we'll never have two buckets of money, you know, one for salaries and one for everything else, that we are always going to have line items in there. But this will be one of the recommendations that we watch very carefully over the next few years to make sure that those requirements that are coming forward are also leaving a lot of flexibility at the school district level, which thus far we've been able to achieve. So we appreciate that.
Anyone else? Down at the end, go ahead.
The comment has to do back to the Common Core. I really hope we are able to separate out high-stakes testing from increased standards in subject areas that are really critical. Some of the most exciting professional development and professional conversations that I have seen are from teachers who are really digging into understanding the Common Core and working to perfect their methods and their way of operating in the saying done, and it's because of the Common Core standards. And I'm really excited about the direction that teachers are taking their work based on the Common Core and the professional development that they're doing to make sure that they can do it well. So I think we need to separate out the high stakes testing from the standards and the Common Core. My question has to do with the recommendation 20 and whether or not somebody has been hired at the state board who's focusing on teacher preparation. And I've not heard of that's happened yet.
No, there has not been anyone. That was just to call out the fact that we're going to request a position to do that, to go before the 2016 legislature.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mr. Lewis.
Mr. Chairman. Just a comment. My first question is, where are we going from here? But I assume that's a question you will ask of us and answer before we're done. But a follow-up is recommendation 18. I believe that may have been on the committees that were merged last year, the subcommittees. It's a topic that has come up many times on the state school board, but in the subcommittee process, and I would represent that with, over the years at the state board level, I'm not sure that we've ever really spent the time that we should have spent or should spend on the issue of school administrators, superintendents, and school boards. So I guess I would just like to throw in my vote from the years of discussions that we've all had together for increased emphasis on that category of issue, or that issue and that category of issues for future review and development.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis, but I would point out that you had 15 years.
But I kept running into your resistance, Mr. Chairman.
A good point, thank you. Go ahead, Bob, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, regarding recommendations 5, which had to do with restructuring the accountability system to be based on student achievement rather than compliance to activities, which may or may not lead to useful outcomes. And number 7, which was about continuous improvement, strategic planning that aligns to those. I have a question. How many of the 115 plus or minus districts are currently following that particular guidance? Is there any feedback mechanism? I mean, do we know whether anybody's actually adopted this sort of focus on student achievement yet with their continuous improvement plans, or are we halfway through there? What's the current feedback on the adoption of those recommendations? Thank you.
Thank you. In the board office, we are working with the school districts, looking at the plans that they've either posted or many of them have been helpful to us in actually sending them to the office so that we can look at them without having to look through their websites. And we're still working with them. It's like the continuous improvement plans, it's a continuous improvement process as well. The first year we really focused on making sure that the districts had plans that were posted on the website, and this year we've focused on the individual pieces that are in that legislation regarding performance measures and targets. So I don't have a number with me. Some are there, some are not, but we're currently in the process of working with the districts to help them accomplish that.
Follow-up question, Tracy. What's your general sense? Are we a third of the way there and making progress every year? Do we feel good about the progress we're making, or do we feel that there's additional focus or communication that needs to be done on that?
I would say we're about a third of the way there. We're making progress. The majority of the districts are very open to understanding exactly what this requirement is. We have identified some areas that I think with working with some of the other stakeholders, we can help get the information out a little more widely to the districts than what has happened this last year. So I'm, work in progress, but next year I know they're going to be fabulous.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, first for an apology and then for an introduction. I apologize to you all. I fully intended when I began my interview here to introduce this young lady to my right, who is Simone Migliore. And I read an op-ed in the local newspaper from a student, a senior high school student at Boise High, all about what education should be about. And so I called her up or made sure that she knew that she would be invited to this task force meeting. So with that, may I introduce you to Simone Migliore.
thank you. I just wanted to ask a question as well. From the input that I've received from my student peers and also from my organization, which focuses a lot on student voice, we recently had an expo to talk about education in Idaho and what we like about it, what we don't like about it, and just getting kind of an idea of the student perspective. That there is a need for connections to the community, employers and local universities to help keep students in Idaho and working in Idaho. And my question is for recommendation 4, is there any kind of reassessment or remodeling of the current career and community counselors in the schools, or is that going to be handled at a district level? I saw under the 5th recommendation under recommendation 4.
So we do have a group that includes not only representatives from the districts, but labor, commerce, professional technical education that is working specifically on this issue. The legislation that passed last year was intended to help identify some different types of college and career advising that have happened in different pockets around the state that have shown great progress and have been very effective. So moving forward, this group concentrating on some of those different college career counseling and advising different models will continue to work and help the school districts, but it has been left at the district level to choose which type of college and career advising that works best for their situation.
Marilyn, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you, and that's a great question and something that I think a lot of groups are really focusing on. There's a partnership with Department of Labor, Department of Commerce, Idaho Digital Learning Academy, the State Board, and others who are really looking at how we can provide more and better college and career advising, because as I'm sure you know, there are not enough counselors in the schools to go around. The governor recommended $2.5 million last year for this. Given the timing and the fact that the bill that Tracy just referenced passed very late in the session, the Appropriations Committee didn't have a chance to take it up, and so it wasn't funded. But it was authorized, the idea and the bill was authorized, it's in statute, and we're very hopeful that this year the legislature will be able to fund that.
We're going to give them a chance.
Thank you for that, those questions. Are there comments or questions from other members of the task force? Wayne.
As a school board member from a small district, a couple of issues that we are dealing with, and I think are pretty much pervasive across the state. One is new board members. This last year, we, across the state, had 40% new school board members voted in to positions of leadership. The mentoring or the training is going to be a real key issue, I think, for future school boards and helping them get online. It takes about 2 years for a school board member just to catch up on all of the terms and the functions and responsibilities. And in our district, we have one board member with 15 years, one with 8, and the other 3 are less than 3 years, 1.5 years, and 2 months. So we are facing across the state a great opportunity in one sense to train them and inform them, but it is a challenge that we are going to need to address in the state. And the other issue is in the area of achieving or making the educational process be one of being proficient in the areas. A thing that we are facing in our district is we used to have a bell curve in our classrooms where students were high achieving, underachieving, and then the majority of the classroom student population was in the middle. In our district now, we have high achieving, proficient students, and we have underachieving and very little in between. And so we are looking at some other ways of structuring our elementary education, moving more toward learning levels and getting away from the third grade designation or whatever. A part of the task force's recommendations were that we be allowed to be innovative and come up with structures like this. In light of some of the testing that we have, how are, there are questions that come up then, how are we going to be evaluated if we go to learning levels and those kinds of things. So there are some issues in implementing our recommendations that are beginning to filter down and become issues on the local level. So I just wanted to raise those things to the attention of the task force and the state, that it is a work in progress, and we may need to reevaluate in light of some of these other issues.
I appreciate that, and I'm sure all of you recognize that a number of the task force recommendations are just kind of in the beginning stages of being implemented. And I'm sure what we found out with most of them is there needs to be some adaptation to make them work in the real world. I mean, the whole issue of mastery, we're really just scratching the surface of mastery and how you go forward. And a few pilot programs and some education is going to go a long way to help us understand how to implement that. But I appreciate your comments. I also appreciate your comments about board members and training. I know when I was a new board member, I don't know what prepares you for service on a local school board. There is nothing like a school budget in business. There's nothing like the way you raise funding in the school district in the business world. There's nothing like the regulation, frankly, that you live in a school district. So I would have welcomed early and often training as a school board member to help me acclimate to that. John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to add to what Wayne said and what Jeff mentioned earlier. The local school boards are elected. There's nothing that we can mandate that they have to do. But there is an opportunity, if there was a form developed, a pledge, where potential school board members said, if elected, I will agree to some kind of training, and certainly the School Boards Association offers that training, then at least the voters would know whether that person was really willing to do the work or just wanted to sit there and be a trustee.
Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to just build on Wayne's comment, and that is obviously we are in the early stages of many of these recommendations. But I think it's important that we do have a feedback loop, because we are going to start to get some real-world experiences and data that allows us to continue to tweak our recommendations. And so if we don't have a feedback mechanism, we ought to have some way that the state board can start to get some feedback, so that we understand, what's working and perhaps what we need to look at modifying as well. So I think it needs to be maybe even formalized in some way.
And I recognize that in fact lies at the responsibility of the state board to figure out how to do that at this point in time.
Well, I hate to push it all to you.
Well, I think as a constitutional body, we have some responsibility. Certainly, the legislature is going to continue to receive
Correct, and we
feedback.
do get feedback as well. But I think that the collaborative process that has been working thus far. I'd like to continue to work in that same direction, but I think an important part of that is that we continue to get feedback in regards to, for example, strategic plans. We had to tweak that this last year based on some feedback. And, I think we need to continue to look for that feedback as well.
Other
Mr. Chairman.
comments, questions?
Mr.
Go ahead,
Chairman,
Cindy.
Governor Otter, members of the task force. I think it's time for me to admit a meeting I had early on as the task force was just beginning, when I called Roger Brown and I said, we need to talk. I was ready to move off the task force. He asked me to meet him at a coffee shop downtown where we discussed why. I said, I don't want to be part of a program that is just to be seen and not taken seriously. We're spending a lot of time talking about important issues in the state of Idaho. And this cannot just be for the TV cameras. It needs to be something that is significant. Well, Roger spent as much time as I wanted in telling him all the problems I had with this. I'm happy to report I am thankful I stayed on the task force, and I'm proud of the work we did. As a 30-year classroom educator, I can honestly say I've seen a difference in my classroom because of what we've done. Bob Blocken caught me first thing when I came in today and said, what are you seeing in your classroom as a result of these recommendations? May I just talk about a few of these things? I've been teaching for 30 years, started in that little K-8 school in Pierce, Idaho, and I'm now teaching at Capitol High School in Boise. And I am happy to say that there have been several things from these recommendations that have made my classroom and my students better. First of all, the emphasis on the college number going up. Honestly, I thought when we were talking about 60%, that was crazy. But what is happening is this renewed emphasis on, all right, well, if you don't go to college, what are you going to do? What kind of a skill are you going to learn, or what kind of a trade are you going to have for your life? What we've seen now is an emphasis on getting students college ready or trade ready. Just next week, I'm so happy about what we're doing at Capitol, and I think there are probably other schools around the state that are doing this, but this is fantastic. It's College Week. All the teachers will be wearing college shirts. We'll be putting our favorite alma maters on our door, decorating. And then one day, each senior, every single senior, goes to the computer lab and registers for college. Now, they will not all go to college, but what if someday in their future they decide they want to? It is not so intimidating because they've had the opportunity, they've seen what it's like. There will be representatives from all the Idaho schools, because we've really encouraged them to look at an Idaho education, that will be there helping students to do that process. I'd like to talk about concurrent credit. We had a long discussion about this in our subcommittee. My response initially was, let's take that concurrent credit money and give it back to higher ed, because basically what we're doing is taking that money from higher ed. But what's happened is students have the opportunity to take these rigorous courses, whether they be AP or concurrent credit. They're pushing those courses and getting college credit for that, so that by the time they graduate, as they've been doing with Linda in the West Data, that they've been able to graduate with an associate degree, with enough credits for that associate degree. And the students are able to graduate. So first of all, they have the experience in the rigorous courses, and they also, one of the biggest concerns they have is paying for college. Well, if they graduate with half their college completed, thank you to the state, then we have more opportunity for them to finish school. The third thing is technology. Do you remember in one of our very first meetings when we said technology to education is like electricity to a home? We can't get by without it. We have to have it. When we were talking about the props, what was that, 3 years ago now? We weren't ready for a one-on-one device. But since that time, we have teachers who are trained and are now requesting the devices. We are nearly one-on-one in our school for devices. Happily, we have created the infrastructure that can support the Wi-Fi. I will admit the afternoon classes are difficult when you have 1,500 students on a device using the Wi-Fi, and sometimes your streaming is a little bit slow. But we're getting there, but we need to continue that push. It's exciting what is happening technology-wise in the classroom. May I speak to Common Core? I agree with Corey. It's not the standards that have a problem. The high-stakes testing is a problem. However, what Common Core standards have done for educators, and I'm speaking in my classroom, my pedagogical skills have been sharpened. I'm a tighter teacher. I'm looking for a higher order of thinking. I'm digging deeper into primary source documents as a social studies educator, and it's pushing me to be a better teacher. I sense that with many of my colleagues. I can't speak to the math part. I can only speak to what we're doing in social studies and also in the language arts. We've seen we've seen many opportunities also through professional development to find out what text is, how we can improve reading cross-curricular in our school and throughout the district. I think that's a real positive. And finally, the leadership premiums that have been given. What's happening here is teachers are now becoming the leaders in education. With the leadership premiums, they're taking the responsibility of training other teachers. Tomorrow in my building, we'll have our professional learning communities meet together, all teacher-driven, and organize meeting time when educators can discuss the professional development that they have requested, all teacher-driven. We agreed in the very beginning days of this task force that the #1 indicator of student success was a highly effective teacher, and that's what the leadership premiums have done. I'm excited about the work we've done on the task force, and I feel so privileged to be able to have worked with all of you, and I'm excited to continue our success. So thank you to the legislature who are going to continue to fund these recommendations.
Hey, anyone want to follow that? I didn't think so. Governor, do you have any closing remarks or anything for us?
Well, I would only say that I would love to see the headlines that come out of this meeting today reflect exactly what you've just said. You know, we always look, and we have to, on return on investment. And just hearing what you said, as far as I'm concerned, is a great return on whatever risk that we have made, but certainly it's the sum of the value of the investment that we have made, because I think that's what we were after. There wasn't anybody that wasn't suggesting that the most valuable education tool we have is the teacher in the classroom, and to the extent that we can improve or help that teacher, mentor that teacher, give that teacher more tools, we're going to reflect that on the population within those classrooms. And that's exactly what we were after. So I hope if they don't say anything about what anybody else has said, I hope what we hear on the news is a great success story. Thank you.
Well, thank you all very much for coming. We appreciate you being here, appreciate your service.
There's one more thing. I hate to add to the burden of the task force, but I think somewhere in the task force or the organizations that are part of this task force, I had an interview on the value of 4- and 5-day classes. Some of the schools, I think we have 48 schools, along with about another 12 charter schools that have gone to 4-day, and they went there initially for the economies that they thought they could gain from that during the downturn, but they found they kind of like them. And there's a myriad of reasons that they like them. One of the reasons is it gives the teachers a day for upping their game. But it also gives the teachers a day to select certain students that need a little extra attention. And so that Friday is good for them. We've saved on some transportation costs because we're not running the buses 5 days a week in those school districts. But, you know, I'm not worried about the transportation costs. What I'm worried about is whether or not we are going to succeed or fail with those. I'm still of the philosophy, and I don't see any reason to change that, that the local school districts ought to have that flexibility. They're the boss of them, and they ought to make that decision. But we need to be able to respond to the 4-day school if we see a reduction in student performance. And we need to have a matrix. We need to have a standard that all 48 are measured, or all 40, is it 48? 48 and 12, isn't it?
48 and 12.
That are participating in 4 days instead of 5 days, so that we can give them the guidance. They still have to make the decision. They still have to live with the results. But I think whether it's the Department of Education, whether it's the state board, but somewhere within the representation of this group, we need to have somebody taking a look at 4-day performance versus 5-day performance.
Well, thank you for that, Governor. I mean, clearly the operative question is, what does it do to student learning? And what are the outcomes for students? And unfortunately, we don't have enough consistent, well, I shouldn't say we don't have enough. The data we have is not specific enough to give those districts, I think, the real tools they need to make that. Once you make the decision about student learning, then it becomes issues of convenience and all of that and money saving. But I appreciate that, and I think the board will work with the department to see if we can provide some tools so the local school districts can make that decision. Thank you very much. I think we stand adjourned.
Generous by maybe a little bit. I don't know.